In 2014, Chelsea Bruck, a 22-year-old woman from Michigan, attended an enormous Halloween party which involved almost 1,000 people in attendance. After she was separated from her friends, she ended up vanishing. Over 6 months later, her skeletonized remains were found in a wooded area, 10 miles away from where she was last seen alive. Hey guys, this is our Halloween episode. I went back and forth about which episode to cover. Back and forth, as I do so often about which episode I want to record. But I really feel that I want to talk about the case of Chelsea Bruck and how she was murdered in Michigan at a Halloween party. It was on October, I believe it was the 25th of 2014. So it was a little bit before the actual Halloween day. But the reason why I chose this case, well, there was a couple reasons. Instead of some of the others that I had been considering this year. First of all, I'm from Michigan originally. Chelsea resided in the lower peninsula of Michigan in Monroe County, and I resided in the upper peninsula. I know I've mentioned that before many times. So we're both Michigan girls, so I kind of felt connected to her on that. But I also found out that Chelsea Bruck, the night she was murdered, she was wearing a poison ivy Halloween costume. And guys, I am dressing up like Poison Ivy this year for Halloween too. So I know I mentioned that as well. So I figured that I definitely needed to do this case. And it is a brutal one. It's a sad one. It's sometimes weird when I come on here being like, hey guys, let's talk about this case and happy Halloween, because there are family members and there are friends and, there are still so many victims of all of the cases, but especially this one right now that are still hurting. This only happened 8 years ago. So first and foremost, before I even start discussing this case and telling you the story of this true crime, I do, just want to put it out there that, prayers for everybody, prayers for her parents, her siblings, her friends, anyone involved. It's terrible. And, for us, I do the research, I do the recording, you guys do the listening. You might, look it up and do some of your own research later on if you check out my case sources. But all in all, this case is very little. It takes very little time out of our life. You know what I mean? We're, maybe a week for me and a day or two at the most for y'all. But for the family and the friends and the survivors, anyone else that was connected to Chelsea, it's every day for them. Every fucking day. So, I really want to, first and foremost, be respectful and send well wishes to them if any of them happen to come across this podcast and listen. Just know that, you're in my thoughts and my prayers, and I'm very sorry for your loss. Chelsea Bruck was born on January 28th of 1992. So she was 22 years old when she went missing after attending that Halloween party. And that Halloween party was in the Frenchtown Township in October of 2014. Chelsea was actually the youngest of 5 children. She had 3 older sisters and 1 brother. She had planned on attending the Monroe Community College so that she could earn a degree, a culinary degree. So she loved to cook. Chelsea worked as a hostess at a place called Olga's Kitchen. It was a Mediterranean restaurant, and that was located in Monroe, Michigan. It was there that she formed a friendship with Laura Taylor. So they were co-workers. Laura was about 10 years older than Chelsea was. So Laura was in her 30s, her early 30s, but they had a lot in common, and they often socialized outside of work, as well as getting along together really, really well during work hours. It was actually Laura who drove Chelsea to this Halloween party on the night that Chelsea disappeared. This was known as Big Mike's Halloween Bash, and this party was a massive event every single year, and people came from all over Michigan to attend. There were 8 heavy metal bands that were scheduled to play, including Big Mike's own band, which was called Pickaxe Preacher. It was expected that about 500 people were going to show up, but like I said, in the beginning of this episode, almost twice as many people ended up attending that year, and they were actually sending people away. He had dozens of people employed as security, and I guess when people would come to park, there was only parking for about 350 people, I believe, and they would have to turn people away. So either they found parking somewhere else or they had to find something else to do that night. But somehow there were almost 1,000 freaking people at this event. And October of 2014 was not the first time that Chelsea ever attended Big Mike's Halloween Bash. She'd also been to another party hosted by Big Mike earlier that year. Chelsea had spent a lot of time making her costume during the weeks leading up to the Halloween party. I guess she had been working on it all summer long, so she was really, really looking forward to this event. Her poison ivy costume consisted of a green leotard and some leggings. Some people said that they were tights. I kind of picture them being tights, but they could be leggings as well. But she had them covered with plastic leaves, which Chelsea had sewn onto the fabric. To go along with it, Chelsea wore a purplish red wig, like a violet red wig, in order to match the appearance of Poison Ivy from the Batman series. Her plan was to win the prize for best costume. And I'm going to be posting some pictures on my Instagram and my Facebook. And you guys can see she looked amazing. You could tell she put a lot of thought and effort into her costume. However, during this Halloween party, Chelsea ended up becoming separated from her friends. Laura ended up leaving the party without her, and she stranded Chelsea at the party. I guess she was figuring that Chelsea would have no problem finding another ride home since they were all hanging out with many other friends at the party. Chelsea was last seen around 3:15 a.m. crying in a parking lot that she had been abandoned by all of her friends. When Chelsea did not return home that day, her family was not initially concerned because Chelsea had planned to sleep over at a friend's house after the party. But Chelsea's mother, Leanda Bruck, gradually became more and more worried as the hours kept ticking by and Chelsea never returned home. Chelsea's family ended up reporting her missing on October 27th, 2014, approximately 2 days after she'd left to go to the party. So the disappearance of Chelsea Bruck received a great deal of media attention in Michigan, with the Bruck's family and friends frequently doing interviews with local news outlets. However, the sheer size of the party where Chelsea was last seen you can just imagine how difficult that made it to investigate this case. Despite the efforts of law enforcement and Bruck's family, nothing was found of Chelsea Bruck until March 22nd, 2015. And this was over 6 months after Chelsea was initially reported missing. On that day, a woman named Cheryl Retzlaff found a red shoe while cleaning her yard. It's something that she did every year, just the spring cleanup. The shoe, which was later identified as being one of Chelsea's shoes, had been discovered approximately 2 miles away from where the Halloween party had been held. Chelsea Bruck was found deceased on April 24th, 2015, when her skeletal remains were uncovered by a construction project. She was discovered in a heavily wooded area approximately 12 miles away from where she had last been seen at that party. A medical examiner later testified that Chelsea had died from blunt force trauma to her head. Now, let's rewind it just a little bit about when Chelsea ended up being abandoned at that party, okay? So Chelsea did not have a car of her own, nor did she even have a driver's license. So she was driven to that party by her friend and coworker, Laura. Chelsea brought along an overnight bag because she was planning on going to her friend's house after leaving that party. She also brought a change of clothing in case the temperature outside was too cold for just her poison ivy costume. And I can swear by that because it's freaking Michigan. And where I'm from, sometimes it was snowing on Halloween in Michigan. So I'm sure that she had a jacket and some warmer clothing in case she needed it. Laura and Chelsea had arrived at the party around 10 p.m. When Chelsea got out of Laura's car, she left her wallet, her purse, and cell phone inside Laura's vehicle since her costume didn't have any pockets. The two met up with Chelsea's other friends underneath the large tent at the center of the party where all the bands were playing. One of Chelsea's friends was named Jessica, and she also worked at Olga's Kitchen with Laura and Chelsea. Like I said, the party was hosted by Big Mike. His real name was Mike Williams, but I'm going to keep referring to him as Big Mike throughout this episode. Like I said, Big Mike hired a significant number of security guards for the event, but they ended up being overwhelmed by the amount of people who had showed up. He also had at least 5 different cameras set up throughout the party area, although those weren't really intended for security as much as they were intended to document the party for memory's sake and probably for like his social media and for advertising for parties to come. However, it might be more accurate to refer to this event as being a concert more than a party, as it more like featured performances from those heavy metal bands than anything else. Besides the name of Big Mike's band, the other band's name was Psychopathic Days, Armageddon Awaits, and Everything Must Die. Now, I'm a rocker girl, but I don't know. I don't know about the names of those bands personally. But most people in attendance were wearing some sort of costume, including Big Mike's own band. They were all dressed as the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which I thought was kind of cute. Chelsea had a great time at the party. That was until she bumped into a post and she smashed her nose around 12:45 a.m. Now, I do want to mention she was intoxicated, and that's probably because she was carrying around a jug of wine with her that night. And on that jug of wine, she had put a label on there that said poison. So she was definitely having a great time, but very intoxicated. After she bumped into that pole and hurt her nose, she told her friends that she wanted to leave the party. Chelsea was feeling a little confused and disorientated from the head injury, and her nose was starting to bleed profusely. but her friends, everybody else at the party, convinced her to stay. They told her that if she just drinks a little bit more, then she won't feel her nose hurting anymore, that kind of thing, because they were party friends. You know what I mean? Like when you're having fun and you're wanting to have a good time, you know, you don't want to necessarily have to leave just because one person bumped their nose. I'm not saying that it's good or bad, but like I don't want to say anything bad about their friends because they were young kids and they were having fun. It seems like Chelsea was able to recover from her injury well enough because she kept partying, but she ended up becoming separated by her friends in the process. The enormous crowd of party goers was impossible for her to navigate. Now, sources have conflicted. During my research, I was trying to figure out what time Laura had actually left the party. There was an article I read that said that Laura left before Chelsea injured her nose, meaning that she had already left before 12:45 a.m. However, there was another article saying that Laura left around 1 o'clock a.m., which would mean that she left after Chelsea was injured. So I'm not sure if she left after Chelsea was injured. I'm not sure why Chelsea didn't just go with her. So there's no way of knowing which source is more accurate, but I kind of get the feeling, I mean, it makes sense to me that Laura left before that happened, because otherwise, why wouldn't Chelsea have just left with Laura? Because for one thing, all of her shit was inside Laura's car. So that part's a little bit confusing, but I just want to think in my head that, you know, Laura left before. So Laura probably didn't anticipate that Chelsea was going to have trouble finding somebody else to give her a ride anywhere. But before leaving, she had given Chelsea's purse, cell phone, and overnight bag to another friend. It was a mutual friend by the name of Becky. But Becky wasn't able to find Chelsea in all the chaos of the party. Unwilling to be late for work the next day, Becky realized she needed to get home so she could get some sleep. After making a pretty fruitless effort to locate Chelsea, Becky just ended up leaving the party, which kind of sucks. But again, you know, I'm not going to shame anyone, you know, for wanting to be responsible and wanting to get home so she could get to work on time. I'm sure that Becky also felt that, you know, that Chelsea was going to find a ride with other friends, because it's not like there was just a few of them together. It was a nice size group. By looking at the pictures, it would make sense that Chelsea would be able to find a ride home with somebody else. But anyways, when Becky left, she took Chelsea's overnight bag, cell phone, and purse with her. So that part kind of sucks, because that left Chelsea stranded without any money. She didn't have her cell phone, and she didn't have any change of clothing or warmer clothing. From 1 a.m. to 3 a.m., Chelsea was seen kind of meandering around the party, often begging others to lend her a cell phone. Chelsea was complaining to them of being cold. She knew that her poison ivy costume was not going to be warm enough to last the night. But of course, that extra jacket and the other clothes she packed would have been really, really helpful, you know, had Becky not taken them with her. Around 3:15 a.m., Chelsea was seen by someone crying in the parking lot. And that just breaks my heart. It really does. And that was the last time anybody had ever witnessed Chelsea alive. When Big Mike awoke on October 27th, he started receiving text messages from various people asking if he knew what had happened to Chelsea Bruck. He didn't even know who Chelsea was, but he agreed to look around the farm field to see if maybe she had passed out or something. He went out searching with his dog around 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, but while he was searching through the field with his dog had gotten stuck in a fox trap and was injured. Leanda Bruck, Chelsea's mother, had personally drove out to Big Mike's farmhouse, and she was demanding to search his property. Big Mike met her while he was carrying the dog back from the field to his house after the dog had been injured. At that time, Mike had blood all over his clothes from carrying the dog. He told Leanda that he just needed to take his dog to the vet, but also she, was more than free and welcome to search the property while he wasn't there. When Big Mike returned, though, he found the Bruck family was already searching his property along with 10 or 20 other people, including some police investigators. Big Mike, of course, like you knew this was coming, he quickly became the focus of suspicion. Bruck's family told news outlets that they believed that it was Big Mike who was responsible for Chelsea's disappearance. They had said that she was probably tied up in Big Mike's basement. So, I understand in the heat of the moment, parents and family panicking and wanting, to assume, that the person in front of them was the guilty party. And of course I don't want to shame them for that either, because I think it's terrible that they were in that position. But their suspicions, they were enlarged. Their suspicions grew huge when Big Mike had refused to take a polygraph test, and he also refused to allow police to search his house. So, and I don't blame Big Mike, he had every right to do that, but then, of course, by refusing these things, Chelsea's family kind of, didn't go crazy, but just their suspicions were so huge, and I think that they just felt that they had their suspect right then and there. The police did get a warrant, though, when they forced their way into Big Mike's home. After searching all over the place, they ended up finding nothing of interest. The disappearance of Chelsea Bruck was first reported in the local news on October 28th of 2014. Soon after this, police released a sketch of a potential suspect. The sketch was based on an eyewitness account from a person who claimed to have seen Chelsea leave the party with an unknown male. According to that witness, Chelsea didn't appear frightened or scared of this guy. She acted like she knew him, and she voluntarily entered his vehicle without being threatened or forced by him. This sketch was then displayed on news channels throughout the state of Michigan as police solicited the public for help. They were asking for help in finding this unknown man. The sketch generated hundreds of tips, but none of them even amounted to anything. At the same time, Chelsea's friends checked every hotel and motel in Monroe County after they heard a tip that Chelsea may have been staying in one of them. Of course, this was a stressful time for Big Mike. People were constantly sneaking onto his property at night to search for Chelsea, and this continued for weeks and weeks after her disappearance was first announced. More than once, he even woke up to find drones flying around his house, peeking in through the windows. The police were particularly unpleasant with him, though. Big Mike says that the SWAT team pushed him to the ground and threatened to shoot his dog during their search. Apparently, they were very interested in his fire pit for some reason, and they were constantly digging around it for quite some time. On internet forums which discussed the disappearance, a popular speculation at the time was that Chelsea's disappearance may have been connected to the 2012 murder of Julia Niswender, who was a 23-year-old woman who had been attacked and murdered inside her own apartment in Ypsilanti, Michigan. It's unclear what had triggered these rumors, but Julia Niswender's name popped up frequently in online discussions about Chelsea Bruck's disappearance. And it's really, really, really a cruel coincidence, but it turns out that Chelsea's older sister, Cassandra Bruck, had been friends with Julia Niswender, as well as Julia's twin sister, Jennifer Niswender. So when Jennifer learned that her sister had been murdered, Cassandra was one of the first people she had called for support. Cassandra had seen how much anguish it had caused for Jennifer when Julia had been murdered, and now she had to wonder if her own sister Chelsea had been murdered too. A vigil was held for Chelsea Bruck on November 3rd in her hometown of Maybe. Maybe is an extremely small town which is located in Monroe County, Michigan. The town has less than 600 residents. The media attention surrounding the case attracted many tips, many of which turned out to be not at all useful. For example, detectives received a tip that they should speak to a guy named Harlan Bird, who claimed to have important information. When detectives spoke to Harlan told them that he had seen two men harassing Chelsea during the night of the party around in the parking lot. Harlan said he had chased them off and then put her in a nearby truck while he went to go get help. However, when he returned, he said that both Chelsea and the truck were gone. Harlan also said that her nose had been bleeding, which caused her blood to get all over his shirt. This story immediately seemed to be a little off. Why hadn't anybody else seen these guys who were supposedly harassing Chelsea? And why would he just put her in some random truck? That's weird. And why would he have waited so long to come forward with this information? They asked him if he still had the shirt with the blood on it because they wanted to DNA test the blood to see if it was really Chelsea's blood. But of course, Harlan said he'd already washed that shirt. There were other things that seemed a bit off about Harlan's story as well. He even asked them if it would still be possible to DNA test the shirt after it had been washed. The detectives told him no. If it's been washed, then it's pointless to have it tested for DNA. Harlan seemed to be relieved when he heard that, which made them even more suspicious. Like, they were wondering what this guy was up to. Eventually, Harlan admitted to them that he had made up the entire story. What a jackass. Because he wanted to look like a hero for helping the police solve the case. Harlan, of course, was then arrested for lying to the police. The next thing that happened, there was a woman from Ohio. There was a woman from Ohio. I don't know what the fuck that word was, from. There was a woman from Ohio named Carrie Carr, and she told detectives that her ex-boyfriend had confessed to her that he had murdered Chelsea. She was emphatic that he would kill her if he knew that she told on him. And so she emphasized that if they brought him in for questioning, then they had to arrest him. They couldn't just bring him in and let them go, because then her life would be in jeopardy. So, of course, the police went to see this ex-boyfriend. They brought him in for questioning, but he immediately suspected that Carrie was trying to set him up. Without the police ever even mentioning Carrie to him at all, he somehow knew that she was involved. He told the police that whatever Carrie had said about him wasn't true. He had told the police that Carrie was crazy and she was doing all this insane stuff to try to get him in trouble for something. After working out an alibi for the ex-boyfriend, the police went back to this Carrie chick. Carrie admitted that she had made the whole thing up as well. So she had just been trying to get her ex-boyfriend in trouble. She's such a fucking stupid ass. So, of course, Carrie was then arrested for lying to the police. Guys, let's not lie to the police. I mean, as not only are you going to go to fucking jail, you're going to be arrested for lying, but you are wasting police time. You're wasting resources. You're wasting taxpayers' money. Let's not fucking lie. Stupid douchebags. But anyways, no significant progress was made until April 5th of 2015. Now, on that day, that's when Chelsea's poison ivy costume was finally found. It had been discovered inside an abandoned building by a pair of men who were doing something illegal there. Eric Kassab was the man who found the costume and wig. He did not recognize the significance of what he'd found at the time, but one day while watching TV, he saw it mentioned that a woman had disappeared from a party while wearing a poison ivy costume. After seeing a picture of Chelsea in that costume, the man suddenly realized the importance of what he had found inside that abandoned building. He was initially reluctant to say anything about it, though, because, he knew that his DNA would be on the costume from when he'd touched it, and he knew he had been inside there doing something illegal. But, however, he eventually did the right thing, and he informed police of the costume and told them where he had found it. Ominously, when police finally did receive the costume, they discovered that it had been ripped around the crotch area. In addition, detectives working the case also discovered another interesting thing. Totally coincidental, but it turned out that Harlan Bird, the hero, or the guy that wanted to be the hero, lived extremely close to where the costume was found. In fact, there was a direct line of sight from Harlan's dwelling to that abandoned building where the costume was discovered. Weird. So, of course, they pulled Harlan in again, and this time they were certain that he'd murdered Chelsea. Harlan admitted to them that he had lied to them before, but he insisted that he had not killed Chelsea. He agreed right then and there to take a polygraph test, and he passed. But of course, detectives still remain suspicious of Harlan. Sources conflict regarding whether or not investigators were able to get any useful DNA from the poison ivy costume. Some reports say that they were able to get DNA from a brown stain on the costume, but other sources say that no usable DNA evidence was found until Chelsea's leggings or tights were recovered later on September 2nd of 2015. Now, the skeletonized remains of Chelsea Bruck were located on April 24th, 2015. She had been found buried on a property of a farmer about 10 miles away from where the party had been held. So this farmer was having a new building constructed. I think he was building a home from what I remember in my research. And one of his workers ended up noticing the body during the excavation. So it's very remarkable that Chelsea was ever found because she was buried in the ground in a fairly isolated area. So if they had not decided to build on this exact spot, then she would never have probably been found. And if the body had not been noticed when it was, the building may have been built on top of Chelsea Bruck, which is horrifying for her and totally horrifying for her family and loved ones, But, yeah, so she was found. Her body was badly decomposed. There was some blonde hair on the skull that was left, and there was very little skin. There was skin on her chest and on one of her legs, and that was it. And guys, before I move on with my story or with this case, I do want to tell you guys about another awesome, amazing fucking podcast that I love. It's another married couple. I almost feel like I need to get a partner to do this podcast with sometimes because there are so many great duos that are doing podcasts together, and this team is one of them. So I'm going to play you their trailer and then come back and tell you a little bit about why I love them so much.
Hello everyone, my name is Brad.
And I'm Denise. We are the hosts of World's True Crime Podcast. Every Monday, we release an episode researched by me about the most heinous criminals throughout history from across the globe.
And then every Thursday, we will release an episode from me about disappearances, UFOs, the unexplained, and strange history. To lighten up the episode, we take part in movie trivia at the time of the incidents.
You can find us everywhere you listen to podcasts and find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook.
We also can be found at worldstruecrime.com. So just remember, everybody, the world's not always as it seems.
No, it's not.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
You guys got to check them out. What I love most about them is they have done some cases that I have not even heard of. I've been a true crime fan for a long time, and when I see what they're releasing, I'm like, oh my gosh, haven't heard of that before. My two favorite episodes from them so far has been one about a lot of the experiments and crimes against humanity that were done in China years ago. I believe it was back in, I don't remember. I want to say it was at least like 50 years ago, 50, 60 years ago. But that was a brutal, brutal, brutal case. And Brad had his wife in tears. It was such a horrifying case. And if you have the stomach to bear it, I would really recommend listening to it sometimes, because it was like unreal, the types of things that happen in the world. And we literally have no idea, and we can't really even comprehend it. Another favorite episode that they have done, they are so great together, but I really, really loved the episode. They were talking about this little girl that had been reincarnated, and she was like 6 years old, and she like totally remembered her entire life. She had been married, all this kind of crazy stuff, and people didn't really believe her, and she would like literally bring her parents and other people like to her old address, and she was upset that her husband had remarried even after he promised her that he would never remarry after she passed away and everything. But they're just so interesting. They bring so much to the table as far as like true crime podcasts go. So if you're wanting to listen to something different, I would absolutely recommend these two. All right, let's get back to Chelsea's case. Now, throughout all of the months that Chelsea had been missing, the area of Monroe County, Michigan had been filled with flyers and purple ribbons. Purple was Chelsea's favorite color. The entire community was totally devastated by news that her body had been found. Chelsea was one of 5 siblings, like I had said earlier, and her brother Nathaniel thanked the community for the hundreds of people who had helped search for Chelsea during that time frame. Chelsea's friends and family had circulated over 1 million flyers in hopes that she would end up being found alive. And unfortunately, that isn't what happened. The search for Chelsea was now over, but now it was a search for her murderer. At this time, the investigation was very interested in a guy who had been wearing a gray hoodie and a brown vest at the Halloween party. Why the police were interested in him is unclear. I don't know how they found out about this guy, but they circulated his picture all over the news until they found him. Once he was identified, they successfully convinced him to schedule a polygraph test, but that ended up being pointless because a match for the DNA ended up being found before he could even be administered the polygraph. It was on July 18th, 2016, that a match was found for the DNA evidence found on that poison ivy costume. It was from a man named Daniel Clay. He had recently been arrested for stealing a backpack, so his DNA had been collected and added to a DNA database. Daniel Clay, this is very, very interesting, guys. Daniel Clay was the ex-boyfriend of Jessica, who was one of Chelsea's friends. And remember, Jessica had also attended that party with Chelsea that night. So, frankly, this was one of those cases where if the suspect had just shut the fuck up and asked for an attorney instead of just talking to the police, it might have been difficult to convict him. Not impossible, but difficult. Sure, the DNA itself might have been enough, but the DNA was only touch DNA, which meant that it could have been potentially explained away. So it was important for detectives to get a confession from Daniel Clay. They never managed to quite get a full confession out of him, but they were able to trick him into making a number of extremely damaging admissions. When the detectives first arrested Daniel, they did not initially tell him that he was a suspect for Chelsea's murder. Instead, they had arrested him for an unrelated charge. It turned out that this lowlife had some unpaid child support. Surprise, surprise. So they got to use that as an excuse to arrest him. But after they brought him in, they soon started asking questions about Big Mike's Halloween bash. And you could just see in video footage on YouTube, Daniel's mind was starting to race. He was starting to panic. He was wondering what evidence the police had against him.
You're telling me there's a possibility. You had sex with a girl in the backseat of that car?
Yeah.
It was backseat, right?
Yeah.
You had sex with a female that had dark hair in the back of your car?
Yeah.
All right? You're telling me you left alone.
Mm-hmm.
There's a possibility, all right, a likelihood, and I say likelihood, which I'm 99.9% sure that it was Chelsea that you had sex with.
Like, I don't remember who I had sex with that night. I know I was up and had sex with someone. I've always wondered if it could have been her or not. And then you guys called me and it freaked me out.
Well,
I didn't want to say I had sex with somebody and then find out it's her and then, she disappeared. And I know I left alone. I know I didn't do anything. I don't even know where the her costume was found at. I don't know where that spot is. I do know the other spot, like the area. I don't know where she was found along there.
See, but the thing is you remember, it's coming back. It was skin, all right, from force, from tear. Your DNA cells were on where her crotch was torn and where her top was torn.
From grabbing her or something.
Okay, so that's where your DNA was.
Okay.
I'm past that.
Okay.
All right? I know that you tore that.
I didn't tear it.
We're past
Pulled it off or whatever. Yeah.
Okay. So, but it was torn. You had to tear it?
I didn't tear it.
But I'm not getting
that. Could have been somebody after me or something.
Okay, so there was, and this is the thing, all right?
There had to be somebody after me.
Listen to me, Daniel. We're past all of that.
Okay.
All right? I have your DNA where her stuff was torn. Nobody else's. Nobody. No one. Okay? This is where we're at. Okay? This is where it's time. Something happened when you left with her.
Now
listen, when you left,
now leave her.
Either something happened where it was intentional, unintentional, accidental. Okay, so listen to me. Now is the time for you to tell us what happened, because are you that monster murderer?
It wasn't.
Did you intentionally?
No, I did not intentionally hurt her.
Okay, then we need to know what happened. Okay, there's a big difference.
And she did get freaky.
Okay.
And we sat there, and then she's like, all right, well, let's go. Because we had sex there. Then we left.
Okay.
And had sex somewhere else.
Where's somewhere else?
It wasn't Briar Hill Road. We were just driving around.
Okay.
Having sex. Because she did, leave. And I had seen her as I was pulling out. She's like, I'm about to walk. I'm so tired of this. I'm like, stop in. We'll go.
Okay.
She's like, okay.
Okay.
And had sex. It got rough. She likes it right.
I know.
Choked and stuff. Yeah. And then she got it. And I freaked out. I was wasted.
Okay, so hold on. Let's stop. Now, you feel like a lot of just went off your chest, don't you?
Yeah, because it's something that...
It's something that eats you up.
Oh my gosh, just listening to that motherfucker pisses me off. And I would call him a piece of human fucking garbage. but that's actually an insult to human fucking garbage. But anyways, like you heard, at first Daniel denied knowing anything about Chelsea Bruck or her disappearance. He said that he'd only learned of Chelsea's disappearance because of all the media coverage surrounding the case. But he eventually pivoted to saying he might have had sex with the woman who might have been Chelsea during the party, perhaps hoping to explain why his DNA might have been on her clothing. So he was trying to make it seem like, she was into freaky sex and he didn't rip her clothing, but, he had pulled it off of her. So that was maybe why his DNA was on her. And we know that, even if she did ever have sex with anyone at a party, she put in a lot of work, with that costume. She had been working on that costume since the summer months. She would have never ripped it herself, or she would have never allowed a man, no matter how intoxicated she would have not wanted her Halloween costume to be ripped. I know this as a woman. Right? So anyways, one of the detectives did come up with the sneaky little ploy to get Fuckface talking. He told Clay that Chelsea Bruck suffered from something called brittle bone disease. It's unclear that if this is a real disease or not, but I did hear that there is some kind of disease, like not osteoporosis, but there was something else I was reading about it, and I'm not going to pause to go over to that article again, but I was reading something this morning that there is something, so I don't know, but the detective told Clay that Chelsea had been born with an abnormally low bone density. Her bones were so weak, he said, that even small, little tiny accidents like tripping over something or falling could potentially cause her serious injury. And Daniel fell hard for that obvious bait, and he immediately changed his story to that and said that he accidentally killed Chelsea while having consensual sex with her. According to his story, he was having sex with Chelsea when suddenly she began biting him and smacking him. At that point, she started yelling at him to choke her. And so he said he did start choking her, but he accidentally squeezed a little bit too hard and accidentally killed her in the process. Daniel said that he panicked after that because he thought people were going to assume he'd murdered Chelsea like he fucking did. And so he hid her body. He admitted to dragging Chelsea's unconscious body out to the area where it was eventually found and burying her to conceal her death. The biggest flaw in Daniel's story was that it did not match Chelsea's actual cause of death, which the coroner said had been blunt force trauma to the head. The coroner had said that Chelsea did not die by strangulation. Clay was arrested and charged with second-degree murder around July 22nd of 2016. However, that was soon increased to first-degree murder. In Michigan, there are 3 ways to commit first-degree murder. The first and most obvious is the killing of a law enforcement officer. The second is premeditation. A premeditated killing is first-degree murder. What premeditation actually means, though, has always been kind of vague, but it generally implies that the murder was purposely committed subsequent to some level of calculation and an amount of planning. The third type of first-degree murder in Michigan is felony murder. A death resulting from the commission of certain felonies can amount to first-degree murder, even if the death was not necessarily intended or foreseen. This is the type of murder that's most relevant to the case of Chelsea Bruck, since the prosecution theory involved her being killed during or immediately after the commission of rape or attempted rape. So at Daniel's trial, the primary issue was not whether or not Daniel had killed Chelsea Bruck. He'd already foolishly admitted to that. Rather, the most important question was whether or not her death had occurred during consensual sex or rape. Therefore, the damage done to Chelsea's costume became an important piece of evidence because it showed that the costume had been violently ripped off of her. During the trial, Daniel testified in his own defense. He said that he had not intended to kill Chelsea, that her death had been a tragic accident. His explanation for the blunt force trauma to her head was that when he'd put her body in the car, he accidentally slammed her head into a car door. Daniel also suggested that additional injuries may have occurred while he had been dragging Chelsea's body. And then he said something disgusting to the effect like, people like to get choked sometimes during sex. And I'm not a very conventional guy. Fuck you, Daniel. Fucking loser. Anyways, this case became frighteningly close to not being solved. If Daniel had been more effective at getting rid of Chelsea's clothing, there wouldn't have been any way to get a DNA sample or connect him to the murder whatsoever. But in the end, his luck did run out. Daniel Clay was found guilty of first-degree murder on May 16th of 2017. But that was not the end of Daniel Clay's legal troubles. This is great. When his DNA was put into the database, it also connected him to an unsolved home invasion from June of 2016. That incident involved an unknown male, which was later identified as the one and only Daniel Clay, breaking into a woman's apartment and sexually assaulting her. The details of this June 2016 home invasion are not anywhere it's not like made for public consumption. Like, we can't read about it. We don't know who it is. We don't know any of the other details. But the judge who oversaw the home invasion case had this to say: "This was brutal rape. It was degrading. It was dehumanizing. Mr. Clay, you're just an opportunist and a predator. You're a liar, and now you're a serial rapist." That judge sentenced Clay to an additional 40 to 75 years for the home invasion on top of the life sentence for which he was already serving for the murder of Chelsea Bruck. I also want to mention that he tried to overturn his sentence with an appeal, but the judge upheld the sentence, the ruling and the sentence. So he is exactly where he belongs, and he is going to be staying there, which I'm sure is, as sad as the entire thing is for the family and the friends, I'm sure that it's gratifying for them as well, just to know that he is being punished for what he did to Chelsea. I know that her mother, Chelsea's mother, has said in interviews, I think one of them was on Oxygen, has stated that if she had known, being 22 years old or not, had she been aware that Chelsea was planning on going to a party that had over 600 people in attendance, that she would have never, ever allowed Chelsea to attend that party. And I did want to mention too, I know it kind of seemed like I, gave up such an easy pass to these friends in the beginning of this episode when I was kind of telling you guys about the case. I'm mostly doing that because, they were kids. They were, in party mode, and they feel bad enough as it is. I've read plenty of reports and watched plenty of videos where they feel like it's been the biggest mistake that they've ever made in their life by leaving Chelsea behind or not making sure that Chelsea had a ride home after that party. So there's really nothing that I could say negative if I wanted to go that route, which I don't. If I wanted to go that route, there's nothing that I could say, there's nothing that you could think that they haven't said or thought about, you know, their own actions themselves. So it's pointless to blame people. It's just pointless to shame them. And I was appalled. I did listen to a couple of different podcast episodes about this earlier in October when I was kind of trying to decide which episode I wanted to release for Halloween weekend. And there was one in particular. It's a very well-known podcast. I'm not going to tell you the name of it, but it's one word. It starts with M and it ends with D. So you can put the puzzle pieces together. But they did this episode, I believe it was in 2019. And those hosts should be fucking ashamed of themselves, because the way they talked about Chelsea's friends was disgusting. So, I mean, that's not a podcast. I used to enjoy it, but it's not a podcast I enjoy anymore. I don't even give them hate listens anymore. I took them off my listener list. I stopped following them. It's all cool for those of you who listen to my podcast and are still fans of theirs, but like, it made me so sick listening to them go on and on and on and shame and blame her friends that it, like, I had like a yucky feeling in my mouth, like I was going to throw up, because I really feel as podcasters, like, it's not up to us. Like, yeah, you know, I call the fucking like murderers and serial killers and, you know, the criminals, I call them words. I call them fucking douchebags and assholes because that's what they are. But I'm not saying that these friends were victims per se, but I already know that I'm sure that they beat themselves up every fucking day and feel an enormous amount of guilt. So it's not my place to make them feel any worse than they already feel. So I hope I hope anybody else who covers Chelsea's case in the future can kind of follow suit and keep the podcast episode and the story and the case about Chelsea, about what an awesome girl she was, young woman she was, how much life she still had left ahead of her. But unfortunately, you know, she ended up being in the path of Daniel Clay. Now, ending this on a very positive note, I do want to tell you guys that in September of 2017, the friends and family of Chelsea Bruck established the Chelsea Bruck Memorial Scholarship at Monroe Community College. Now, this is super, super cool. So if there's anybody out there that feels so inclined to donate even a couple of dollars to this fund, I thank you in advance. I'm going to tell you what it's all about, and it brought tears to my eyes. I'm going to post the link in the show notes and on social media in case, you know, there's any of you who do want to donate. But it's with the intent of Chelsea's family to raise a minimum of $20,000, not $2,000, $20,000, so that they can establish an endowed scholarship. The scholarship is being created with an initial gift of $7,000. That's what they started with in September of 2017. The funds will provide scholarship support for an MCCC student enrolled in the Culinary Skills and Management program, and it's going to give preference to a student with a GED, which is super, super cool, because I guess that Chelsea Bruck had struggled during school, and she was just a couple credits short of her high school diploma. At the time that she disappeared, she was researching GED programs and talking about wanting to go to culinary school. She had worked at Olga's Kitchen for 4.5 years, okay? The funds of this scholarship fund They're coming from fundraising donations, mostly from families throughout Monroe County, but the family want to keep the money in Monroe, and their hope is to keep Chelsea's memory alive. So real quick, any information, I'm going to include it in the notes, but if you would like to donate, you can contact the foundation at area code 734-384-4214. And I just think that is freaking amazing that she's going to live on. Chelsea's memory is going to stay alive. And that's the case, guys. So I hope everybody has a very safe and fun Halloween. And I hope that you keep talking crime.